What's up, everybody? How's it going? So, I spend a lot of time looking for weird, obscure, like lost TV shows from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, shows I might have never heard of or that just people have like forgotten about that isn't really on streaming anymore. One such TV show is one I recently ran into called Night Vision. It didn't get very far. It only got one season, which is kind of crazy considering all the names behind it. You had appearances from Natasha Lyonne, Lou Diamond Phillips, Timothy Oliphant. Some of the episodes were directed by Toby Hooper and Bill Pullman. The music was done by George Clinton. I mean, I could just keep naming all the star power that was in this thing. Some of them were late roles from older actors. Some of them were early appearances from people who would go on to be famous. But there's a lot of names behind this shit. And most importantly, it was hosted by Henry Rollins. That's what really wrote me in. Whenever I found this, the first image I saw was just Henry Rollins standing there, giving that Henry Rollins look. One of the co-creators for the show was a former writer for Goosebumps. And of course, it's a horror anthology. I love anthologies, especially like TV show anthologies. I love Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? When I find one of these old, like one-off anthology shows from that time period, I get pretty stoked. I'm not gonna lie. And when I found it and started watching it, I looked into it a little bit. And apparently, like, it was produced by Warner Brothers to put on Fox as like a primetime show. The creators, I guess, didn't want it to have a host. They wanted it to have like a short narration at the beginning, but Fox insisted they get a host. Billy Brown, the writer from Goosebumps, said that they almost got Gary Oldman, which would have been fucking insane, having Dracula host your horror anthology show. And I mean, yeah, he's more than Dracula, but also, come on, like, in this case, he needs to be Dracula. But yeah, Fox didn't want that. They were shooting for that edginess, you know? Everything in this time period was dripping with edginess. It was the most edgy time to be alive. And so they wanted Henry Rollins. And I won't lie, I'm kind of glad they did, because he adds a lot to the show. But yeah, it was gonna go on primetime. And then last minute, Fox got cold feet or something and put Freaky Links in its spot, which in itself is another kind of like obscure, forgotten about TV show. It was like an X-Files ripoff with Ethan Embry. But yeah, they ended up dumping this thing like in the off season as a filler show. They only showed like 10 of the episodes. I think the next year, Sci-Fi Channel, back when they were actually Sci-Fi Channel, picked it up, re-aired it. And then they turned the last 3 episodes into an anthology movie called Shadow Realm. And then eventually, in the end of it, probably in like the early 2010s or something, it ended up playing a lot on Chiller, which was an awesome old cable channel that is unfortunately gone now. I had never heard of this. It's kind of cool because there is tons of this shit out there. Just these one season shows that like even a kid like me who watched way too much TV, I kind of found out that if you just go digging, you can find tons of shit. And it'll always be obscure, usually one season shows like this, but there's a lot of juice in them sometimes. And they're worth going and looking for if you're into that sort of thing. I do it. It's probably unhealthy. Who knows? But I do this shit and it's fun. And because of that, I get to bring you this, which is a review of one of the episodes I've watched. I've watched 2 so far. I figured I would talk about this one. It is episode 10. There's 2 stories to every show. And the first one in this one is called Hate Puppet. And the second one is called Darkness.
Meet Andy Harris.
When this played, I cracked up. He just kind of pops out. He's all stiff and flexing, trying to look buff. He's giving his best Rod Serling impersonation, which like it almost seems intentional because he's imitating that Rod Serling like cadence to a T.
Hard worker, all around nice guy. But today Andy Harris is having a nightmare.
But it's funny because it's Henry Rollins doing it and his tight ass muscle shirt. Right off the bat, that first scene, like Henry Rollins needed to be a horror host. It always needed to happen, and luckily it did. But yeah, then we meet Andy Harris. He's our main character, played by Chad Lowe. This show moves fast, man. So like, you come out of the gate running, you just meet the dude, you don't learn a lot about him. He just runs straight into this giant gypsy guy, spills his coffee on him. The guy's like dripping with coffee and cream in his beard, and he just lets out a scream out of nowhere. And then he does something, rips off a piece of his clothes, spits in it, says a bunch of weird shit. And Chad Lowe just kind of like, is like, that was fucking weird, and he just kind of goes on. It cuts to him in a coffee shop with his brother. They seem to be getting along.
I think he put a hex on you, bro.
And Chad calls for the check, and this server shoots him an immediate stink eye. She comes over, gives him attitude, and he's just kind of like, what the fuck? What was up with her? Kind of casually. And his brother just snaps at him. He's like filled with rage. He's cussing him out about servers' jobs being hard and shit, all kind of out of nowhere. And here's where we get the kind of first instance of Chad Lowe's performance in this episode. It's kind of what carries this whole segment along, because the situation that's unfolding here, where it's really obvious already, people are just like mad at him immediately. Whatever curse this gypsy dude put on him makes people immediately hate his guts. And so most of this episode is him coming upon extreme reactions and just being caught like a deer in the headlights, like he doesn't know what the fuck's going on. It's beautiful. So he's like, what the fuck? Why are you cussing me out over this server who just like gave me attitude? And the brother storms off. Then it cuts to him the next day at work. As soon as he sits down, the boss calls him out for being late and just starts ripping into the dude, talking about how he's been late twice in 3 years, and he's a lazy piece of shit. And again, Chad Lowe is just like, dude, what the fuck? He tries to play it off because presumably, just like with his brother, him and his boss have known each other for 3 years at least and probably have a pretty good rapport. So he's just like, dude, I'm not in the mood right now. And the boss just straight up fires him. And again, spot on reaction. He's just like, what the hell is going on here? He's so confused. He leaves work and he's walking down the road, and he walks through a construction site. And just like you guessed it, these construction workers start yelling at him. And this situation escalates so quickly. The guy's like, hey, bitching at him for walking through the construction site. Chad Lowe's like, dude, I'm sorry. I'll just walk around. And the dude immediately swings at him with a shovel. This other dude comes at him with a pickaxe. They pull out a big angle grinder and are about to just shred his face off. He barely gets away by unplugging the plug with his foot. He does a little quick, short action movie move and manages to get away. And he runs into a cop. And so at this point, you're starting to catch on to what's happening. He's starting to catch on to what's happening. He goes up to this cop and starts explaining what just happened. He's freaking out, and rightfully so. And the cop is just looking at him like, all doubtful and shit.
This guy held me down, and he came at me with
let me guess, a pipe grinder.
And this is where we're introduced to the concept of the book.
That's a scene from a book.
a book.
Kind of calls him out for fucking with him because this is scene by scene what just happened in a book he just read. The new bestseller by William Price called Hate Puppet. And Chad Lowe's like freaking out, trying to get him to listen to him. He goes and grabs him by the sleeves and the cop almost shoots him. And that's kind of when it sinks in that he's just like not going to get anywhere with people and he needs to go find this book. Stumbles into a bookstore that just happens to be playing footage of the author reading the book on this little TV on like a promotional table. And it's playing out basically his day.
Because what the bearded man had said to him was this: "You have filled me with hate, and so hate shall fill those around you."
And before I forget, I want to shout out this ballin' ass 2000s TV soundtrack. It's beautiful. So he grabs a book. He's walking down the street reading it. It's kind of a cool narration scene where the narrator reading the pages of the book is basically going along with him as it happens.
And that's when he noticed the motorcycle.
So this is playing out kind of like Stranger Than Fiction, if you know that movie. But I'm pretty sure before that movie came out. So, but yeah, as he's reading, he basically reads that if he steps out into the road, that he's gonna step out into the road. And when he does, a bike's gonna hit him. So he tries to defy it, stand where he's at, not step into the street. There's a weird editing choice here that I couldn't wrap my head around. I understand what's going on, but basically he thought he was on the sidewalk, but he's actually in the street. He looks over across the street and realizes something, and then a truck that had trees in the bed of it pull away, revealing that he's in the road. I don't know. It was a weird edit. But basically, he was in the road and didn't realize it and almost gets hit by the bike. The guy on the bike runs over his book, throws the pages everywhere, and he starts like scrambling to pick up the pages. I don't know though, like he just left that bookstore because at this point it goes on like he doesn't have a book now and he needs one. But like he seems like a pretty well-off dude. I mean, he's got like a suit and tie job. He was meeting in this big boardroom. Granted, he just got fired, but like he could go get another book real quick, but he doesn't. He goes home, and it's hilarious because at this point he knows the routine. So he like walks in real slow and cautious up to his wife, like kind of nervous, making sure she doesn't immediately just like start screaming at him or like go to fucking beat him with a crowbar or something. But she seems cool. She seems normal. So he just starts laying all this shit out on her. Tells her that he thinks this old gypsy dude cursed him. And she's like, oh, that's funny because I just bought this book about a guy with your name who's got a curse on him. Isn't that funny? And he's like immediately trying to rip the book out of her hands so he can read what's going to happen next. And like, granted, he did kind of like lunge at her and start ripping at the book, but man, her reaction, and of course, I mean, you know, it's because of the curse, but it's just funny to watch these people's reaction because it's so outrageous. He doesn't do shit, and they're just like, you son of a bitch, crank to 11 immediately. Like he just did the worst shit ever to him. But yeah, he gets the book and reads that she's gonna pull a gun on him as she pulls a gun on him. I'm not really sure why she didn't just shoot him right there, because it seems like that would have been the choice somebody under that spell would make, or whatever, the curse. But she like walks him outside at gunpoint.
What are you doing?
Something I should have done a long time ago.
And there's actually a genuinely like sad moment here where he's like,
when I left this house this morning to go to work, we loved each other. What happened to make that change?
she just starts cursing at him and shit. She's about to shoot him. He manages to tackle her. And of course, she gets shot. She's dead. When this happened, man, I was kind of like invested in this dude's character because like he seems like a good dude. They don't give you any backstory. He's not like a dude who, like in some of these anthology segments, gets what he has coming to him or whatever. He's just like seems like a good dude who just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And up to this point, he's like caught a lot of shit, but nothing really bad's happened to him. And this is the point where it's like a point of no return. And it's kind of sad, to be honest with you. But he gets the author's address off of the book jacket. We cut to him. He's at the author's house. He sneaks in, goes to home at gunpoint. By the way, the author is William Atherton. He played the dickhead in Ghostbusters and Biodome. He played a lot of dickheads. He's always a fun character actor to see pop up and stuff. I like him. But yeah, so Chad Lowe's holding him at gunpoint and is telling him to basically write him out of it.
You're gonna write me a sequel.
And there doesn't seem to be any like nefarious like knowledge on the part of the author. He seems like he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He wants him to write basically that it was all a dream and that he wakes up next to his wife and she's fine. William Atherton has hit a like police button. I mean, it's weird. I guess it makes sense because he's like a rich, famous author. He just has this fucking button on his desk that has the fire department and police like at the push of a button. But yeah, basically the cops show up. Chad Lowe makes him write out that it was all a dream. And then he turns the gun on himself. And then we find out that this has been William Atherton retelling all this to a bartender It cuts to a bar. He's telling them the story.
Come on, what'd you do?
The worst thing is he erases the writing after Chad Lowe shot himself, which kind of implies to me that if it would have gone through, it's not gonna now. But yeah, so William Atherton is just like, yeah, the dude was crazy. He saw something in my story that related to him, and he compares it to a trailer for a movie that's playing on the TV called Breakdown Lane. He basically says like that movie could inspire somebody to do the same kind of shit. He makes this kind of pretentious little joke about how what he writes is actually horror as opposed to the trailer playing.
What? You write horror too?
I write psychological terror. There's supposed to be a difference.
This is kind of an end cap to the story. The real story has happened, but you know, the little cool twist is that he's going down the road, he breaks down, and he's basically in the movie he just was poking fun at. He breaks down, he gets out to check under his hood. Oddly enough, he finds a page of the script for Breakdown Lane, which doesn't make a lot of sense. That kind of shit hasn't happened up to this point. Shit just appearing. That shit didn't happen with Chad Lowe, so I don't know why it's happening here, but yeah, the little page of the script is like tucked into his engine compartment, and it says like, you know, there's basically it says there's an axe murderer behind you. He turns around and there is. Pretty cheesy ending to a pretty fun little segment.
We all like to think we control our own destiny, but there's always somebody pulling the strings.
Up next is Darkness. That's the second segment of the episode.
Harlow Winton, working stiff.
It opens with a lady yelling for a guy in this big mansion that's really brightly lit. There are lamps and light bulbs everywhere, and she walks in and finds a gnarly ass corpse. But also, by the way, this scene made up the trailer from the one before for Breakdown Lane. You see it for a second, the hand or whatever. That was a cool little thing I noticed. But yeah, it's a gnarly hand. It looks like it's been skinned. There's like a puddle of blood underneath it. The chick screams and it immediately cuts to Harlow Winton. He's our character. He is played by Michael Rappaport, the actor, comedian, rapper. You might know him from Zebrahead. My Name is Earl. He's been in a lot of stuff. He's pretty funny. I like him. But he's like a phone salesman. Not a very glamorous job is what they're setting up. He's like a worker bee type. And he inherits a mansion from a great uncle he didn't know existed. And a shit ton of money. The dude tells him that he's like the last in his line, and that he's basically inheriting the mansion and all of this dude's assets, and he's getting $25,000 a month to live in the mansion. And the guy is giving him the MTV Cribs tour of the place. Again, it's brightly lit just like it was in the opening. There are lamps everywhere. The guy starts telling him about how his uncle was kind of cuckoo. He was scared of the darkness, so he had all of these lights rigged up on a remote control. He's got a freaking closet full of light bulbs just in case one goes out. The dude was obsessed and rich, and he's basically tricked this mansion out to be just a beacon of light. Also, the dude kind of starts showing some tension to get him to move. He seems to want Michael Rappaport to consider donating the property to the town instead of living there. And he kind of goes into how, like, you know, the family was like pretty much hated around the town. They were like rich moguls who owned all the businesses in the town and pretty much treated them like slave labor and got rich off their backs. And up to this point, Michael Rappaport seems pretty like chill. He's joking with the dude. He kind of seems to understand that his family sucked and that he might not stay.
If you were to donate this property to the town, you would realize a significant tax windfall.
Donate it? I just got here. I gotta have some parties first, right?
And then we catch the first glimpse of the villain in this segment, which is a shadow monster. And while Michael Rappaport is putting up his clothes in the drawer, you see that his uncle even had lights in the drawers so that there were no darkness inside the drawers. And one of the drawers, the light bulb is out and there's a dead, like, mutilated rat in there. So, you know, at this point, you kind of get the gist of what's going on. There's a fucking shadow monster in this house that will like tear you to shreds if you go into the darkness, or presumably if there's any shadow. it can like creep out and get you or something. And so he goes to bed, and the second he turns the lights out, he starts hearing this like spooky sound. I mean, if that was me, I would immediately fucking leave. I would come back later or something. He just kind of like is like, what the fuck? And he decides he's gonna get the house rewired normally. And this is where you kind of start seeing his true colors. He treats these workers like shit, even though he was just telling that dude that he understands because he'd been a working man all his life. He's acting like a super dick to these guys.
So they exploited their workers, huh? I can relate. I've been exploited my whole life. Now just finish your work and leave.
You got it, Mr. Winton.
That's right, Mr. Winton. You treat me with respect.
And then the shadow almost gets him, but the old dude shows back up at his house just in time to like get him up out of the chair. They go back and forth some more, same shit about the old guy wants him to leave, but he doesn't want to. He's slowly becoming more and more of a dick about it, acting a little bit more entitled.
My family practically built this whole town.
And then he actually sees the shadow kill a rat. So at this point, he just knows about the shadow monster. He calls the maid from the beginning of the movie. She gives him a little bit of info. He's a dick to her too.
What are the shadows? I don't. Let me go. What are the shadows?
This is the point where he starts going crazy. He's like obsessing about the lights. He's running around chasing light bulbs, making sure they don't go out and shit. And then the old dude comes back one more time and gives him one more out. Like he could take the $70K he's offering him from the town and he can leave. But at this point, he's full on like piece of shit. He's talking down to the dude. He's talking about his family, like how he finally feels like he's a part of something and all this shit, and how his family is better than the whole town. Like he's gone full on drinking the Kool-Aid mode about his family. The old dude basically tells him that the shadow monster is a manifestation of the family's evil, but he decides that it's fear, and he forms this whole self-centered, like delusional explanation for everything about how the bloodline got watered down and every other family member died because they were weak, unlike him.
Because that's what those shadows are. Fear of greatness. This whole town. You're miserable little people and you have nothing. And you think that you can make me feel guilty? Now I see why Lucius wanted us to live here. So we'd always be able to embrace our greatness and be worthy of his name. Get off my property.
And so he decides he's gonna beat this thing. He finds out that the light actually burns the shadow. So he sets up a fucking Home Alone trap. He basically gets a giant, like, high-powered spotlight, a tube, a bunch of birds, and a bunch of baby monitors. And he sets up this big, intricate trap where he sets birds all through the house with different monitors that all lead up to this big tube. And he's watching the monitors and turning the lights on to like push the shadow monster to the tube. Once it goes through the tube, he turns on the light. It burns up and he thinks he has killed the shadow monster. And this whole time he's talking mad shit to the shadow monster.
Come on.
Talking to the portrait of his dead great uncle or whatever about how awesome they are.
I'm a Winton. You and me, Lucius, were made of the same stuff. We're great.
And then his shadow like jumps off the wall onto his face. He runs over to the spotlight and burns it off. And then it cuts to the big ending where he blinded himself doing that. And now he's trapped forever in that chair in the house, depending on that poor maid from the beginning who works for him now. She got the worst end of the deal. She basically is sentenced to listen to this dude bitch about light bulbs for the rest of his life.
Make sure you check every single light.
And then Henry Rollins rounds it out and drops a stone cold outro.
Harlow Winton, man of means, master of all he sees.
But yeah, I loved this episode. I've watched one more since then. It's really good too. It's a real shame that this anthology kind of got that one season treatment and got dumped in the off season to kind of fill time, because so far it's up there. I mean, I'm not going to say it's up there with the greats, but as far as TV anthologies go, it's pretty damn good. The saddest part is that It basically doesn't exist officially anywhere. It's not on streaming. It's never, the Wikipedia page said that it's never had a DVD release. It's never streamed anywhere. I guess since Chiller, it kind of just hasn't been anywhere. It only exists in pretty poor quality, as you can see from the footage I've been using on YouTube. That's like the only place you can get it. And you know, if somebody got a wild hair up their ass, they could get it taken down. It's just a real shame that there are so many shows out there that are kind of like that. I kind of wish somebody would come along and start preserving them. I mean, some companies do with certain things, but a lot of these seem kind of like they're just kind of gonna disappear, sadly, but hopefully not. This one seemed like a great show from the 2 episodes I've watched. This one, I mean, Chad Lowe, his performance, it was beautiful in this. And on top of that, in that first segment, it's pretty terrifying just to think that, like, you know, everybody you come across is going to like attack you and try to kill you. They did a really good job of just conveying the terror of that situation, in my opinion. Chad Lowe's performance had a lot to do with that, you know. His reactions were pretty real. They weren't super dramatic or anything. He was just dumbfounded the whole episode. And I mean, that's probably how it would really be. You wouldn't know what to do. That's exactly how he played it. And of course, Will Atherton popping up, that doesn't hurt either. And at the time, that concept was probably pretty original. It seems like a kind of stereotypical setup now, but I mean, I don't know. At the time, was it? I haven't thought about it too hard, but I can't think of anything before that. And while the second segment wasn't as good technically, I guess, I mean, you still had Michael Rappaport, who is a great actor, a great comedian, and it was honestly just kind of funny to watch him turn so quickly from this like, oh yeah, I get it, I'm a working man too, to just like this entitled, delusional, insane dickhead. And we can't forget Henry Rollins, the greatest TV show host. Man, I wish we could have gotten more seasons of this and let him really flesh out this Rod Serling but buff kind of character. That could have been entertaining. But yeah, I mean, that's about it. I just got the urge to make this video. I thought it might be cool to shine some light on this old show that I'd never heard of. A lot of people might have just never heard of it. But yeah, hopefully you got something out of it. Maybe you can go check it out if you feel like it. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time.
You're fired! Is that clear enough for you?
You don't seem to appreciate how real.
And so hate shall fill those around you.